Europe's lifeline to the oil fields of the Middle East, becomes the flashpoint in a deadly war. Powerful Western nations will battle a Middle East dictator for control of the Suez Canal. The conflict will suddenly escalate to the brink of nuclear war. It will be a Canadian who finds a way out of the crisis, creating the United Nations' first peacekeepers and a legacy for the world. When it opened 137 years ago, the Suez Canal was called a modern wonder of the world, a 160-kilometer-long channel cutting through the desert between the Mediterranean and Red Seas. A voyage from Europe to India was shortened from 6 months to less than 6 weeks. Ferdinand de Lesseps, the French engineer who designed it, believed his canal to the Orient would create a sensation. He was right. Royalty from across Europe attended the canal's inauguration in 1869. The Vatican called it one of history's most glorious moments. Giuseppe Verdi composed the opera Aida in its honor. For Imperial Britain, the canal became a superhighway for its expanding empire. London now easily linked to its possessions in East Africa, India, the Far East, and its colony in Australia. But there was a problem. Egyptian money and Egyptian slave labor helped build the canal. The profits went to Britain and France. When Egyptian nationalists rebelled against the foreigners, it was English troops who took the lead in quelling the riots, declaring the country to be an indispensable possession of the British Empire. For nearly 75 years, Egypt tried in vain to evict the British. It's not until July 1956 that one man will finally succeed. Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser is a former army colonel who has come to the port city of Alexandria to celebrate the 4th anniversary of a military coup. The popular rebellion toppled the monarchy and then pushed Britain's colonial army out of Egypt. This charismatic new leader now runs the country, but its most vital asset, the Suez Canal, is still controlled by Britain and France. That's about to change.
التطورات اللي حصلت ان احنا صممنا نقوي جيشنا ونسلح جيشنا. صممنا تكون لنا شخصية مستقلة. صممنا تكون لنا حرية مستقلة. الغرض طبعا من هذا الإجراء.
We are not giving in to the colonialists, Nasser tells Egyptians. We are restoring our rights. While he's speaking, 30 men are anxiously waiting at a secret location. They are about to do the unimaginable, seize the Suez Canal. One of them is a young engineer named Adel Azet.
My feelings were a combination of two things. First, fear. It's not an easy job to do. It is a very delicate issue.
They are waiting for a signal, hidden in Nasser's speech. It is de Lesseps, the name of the man who built the canal. Nasser will repeat the name de Lesseps 14 times to make sure his signal is heard. His men come out of hiding and storm the administration offices.
يتجه إخوة لكم من أبناء مصر ليديروا شركة القناة ويقوموا بعمل شركة القناة. الآن دلوقتي يستلموا شركة القناة.
The canal has been taken without a shot being fired. Nationalizing the Suez Canal is a stunning act of defiance.
It was a bombshell, of course, absolute bombshell. We were very happy, to tell you the truth, because it was the right of the Egyptians to do that. The Suez Canal was Egyptian.
It's the most important waterway in the world, the conduit through which Europe receives more than 75% of its oil. At the same time Nasser is in Alexandria, Prime Minister Sir Anthony Eden is welcoming the young Iraqi king to number 10 Downing Street. Eden is doing everything in his power to shore up Britain's empire that has been in decline since World War II. During a gala dinner party for the Iraqi monarch, Eden learns that Nasser has taken the Suez Canal.
It gave a tremendous sense of shock because Britain had not yet really genuinely appreciated in the gut the full effects of the Second World War in depriving Britain essentially of the empire. The seizure of the Canal Company meant that Britain had suddenly been cut off from imperial power and influence in the world.
The royal dinner party is quickly ended. Eden hurries to the cabinet room with some of his ministers. Details of Nasser's speech have been cabled to London. The Chief of the Armed Forces, Sir Gerald Templar, and Louis Mountbatten, First Sea Lord, are rushing to meet with the Prime Minister. The telegrams say it all. The Suez Canal, once called Highway of the Empire, has been taken. In the room that has directed Britain's empire for more than 3 centuries, Eden declares that Nasser can't be allowed to get away with it. He tells his commanders he must not be permitted to have a thumb on our windpipe.
Phrases like thumb on the windpipe encapsulated 2 principles about which we have heard quite a lot recently. One was regime change, the feeling that we must go. The other was preemptive self-defense.
At the Portsmouth Naval Base, Britain prepares for the worst in the Suez crisis. Part of her mothball fleet, idle since World War II, is hastily made ready for action.
But invading Egypt will not be easy. Britain's military had suffered severe budget and manpower cuts. Eden is warned that his generals will need 6 weeks to prepare an invasion force. He turns to his wartime allies for support. French Prime Minister Guy Mollet is first to sign on. But his most important ally has a different reaction. Dwight Eisenhower is in the middle of an election. A spat between Great Britain and her former colonial possessions is the last thing he wants.
I think it became that much more apparent to the United States that the British legacy of imperialism, of colonialism, was a serious liability.
As you know, this country will not go to war, ever, while I am occupying my present post, unless the Congress is called into session.
Eisenhower publicly declares his opposition to any military action. Privately, he tells his Secretary of State that America will never help Britain defend her empire. Eden also asks Canada for help. Canada's External Affairs Minister, Lester Pearson, has known him for more than 2 decades.
Pearson, who knew him from the tennis court, who knew him from the bridge table, knew him from country house weekends, saw him as a highly strung person. But he was very, I wouldn't say fond of Eden, but he respected him.
In a note to the Canadian government, Eden says he is prepared to use force and expects Canada's help. Pearson disagrees.
He recognized that the British perhaps took Canada for granted or expected more of Canada than it could give or it should give.
Pearson says no. For the first time, Canada refuses a British request for military support. Eden is furious.
The British tend to write on their diplomatic documents and make comments such as miserable, which Eden did about Canada's stand.
The crisis is heating up. Nasser is receiving massive military aid from the Soviet Union. He believes he is safe from British attack, but he is ignoring an enemy much closer and much more concerned with his growing military power: Israel. Taking control of the canal is a huge boost to Arab pride.
لنقضي على جميع آثاره ونحقق الصرح الحقيقي من روح السيادة ونحقق البناء الحقيقي من أبنية العزة والكرامة.
Nasser denounces Western imperialism in radio broadcasts heard across the Middle East.
وكما قلت لكم منذ قليل ليس عيب أن أكون فقيرا أو أن أعمل على بناء بلدي، ولكن العيب امتصاص الدماء. كانوا يمتصون الدماء، يمتصون حقوقنا ويسلبونها. اليوم
At the time I was in Kuwait, and I could see that Nasser propaganda was flooding in all the time, and the Kuwaitis and other Arab countries were in danger of falling for it.
To Eden, Nasser is sounding like Hitler and Mussolini in the 1930s. His hatred for the man is growing by the hour.
We all know this is how fascist governments behave. And we all remember only too well what the cost can be in giving in to fascism.
The moment you mentioned the name Nasser, Eden practically got down and chewed the carpet. He was so angry and furious about the whole thing.
Eden will do whatever it takes to bring about Nasser's downfall.
The canal must be run efficiently. It must be run in the interests not of one country, but of all.
Now, the British had planned a nice little scheme which would demonstrate to the world the Egyptians were incompetent at running the canal.
Eden orders the European pilots who guide ships through the Suez Canal to resign. He then tries to overwhelm the inexperienced Egyptian replacements with a barrage of ships.
The ships were ready, poised, the pilots were withdrawn, and the Egyptians ran the canal perfectly.
Nasser's newly trained pilots actually increased the number of ships passing safely through the canal. But Eden has more deadly plans to get rid of Nasser.
As Nasser was making a public speech in Alexandria, a young man fired 8 bullets at him. All missed the premier, but 2 of his aides were wounded.
There were various proposals made to assassinate Nasser, both by the British and by the French.
I'm not exaggerating. Nearly every month, there was an attempt against Nasser from the West, either American or French or British or Israelis. Nearly every month.
The planes just are wildly out of control, putting nerve gas into the ventilation system of Nasser's headquarters, trying to put poison into Nasser's coffee, trying at some point to possibly shoot Nasser.
In his desperation to get rid of Nasser, Eden keeps trying to enlist American support. He sends intelligence from Britain's spy agency showing that Nasser is a communist. but the information from MI6 is highly suspect.
MI6 sexed up their intelligence. In other words, it's not a question of false intelligence as such. It's almost trying to will the intelligence to be true. You know, click your heels together 3 times and you can overthrow Nasser.
Despite growing support from their new ally, the Soviet Union, the Americans remain unconvinced.
They knew full well he was an anti-communist. They knew that he was putting communists in jail. He didn't let those communists out of jail when his relations improved with the Soviet Union.
By the fall of 1956, Eden's generals report that their invasion force is ready. They want to attack now, before winter sets in. But Eden is still trying to rally support for his war effort.
Our quarrel is not with Egypt, still less with the Arab world. It is with Colonel Nasser.
Increasingly, the British public is turning against him. He is about to give up when the arrival of a secret partner suddenly gives him a deadly new set of options. October 5th is a turning point for Anthony Eden. Across Britain, support for his invasion is plummeting. He is forced to take his case to the place he least wants to be, the United Nations.
None of them wanted to go there, and who knows who's going to say what at the UN. And it's very public, and diplomats don't like that. I mean, you know, they want private conversations. That was something which is still true today. You don't take really serious problems to the UN. You settle them privately if you can.
Eden has run out of options. Reluctantly, he agrees to negotiations with Egypt. Dag Hammarskjöld, the dynamic Secretary General, arranges a series of private diplomatic talks.
I can only say that I shall do my best.
But just as Hammarskjöld's talks are gaining momentum, the British suddenly pull out.
Anthony Eden was ready to give up on British military operations. He was ready to negotiate a settlement. The reason why he does not do that is because the French come to him and say, you can't get rid of Nasser, and this is how you do it. You work with Israel.
The crisis is about to take on a deadly new dimension. Cross-border raids and reprisal attacks between Israel and Egypt have been escalating, and now that bitter rivalry will be put into play. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion believes that sophisticated weapons being supplied to Egypt by the Soviets are dangerously upsetting the balance of power.
And he came to the conclusion that a clash is inevitable. It was more a prophecy that eventually fulfilled itself, that the Egyptians may attack us.
In the fall of 1956, Ben-Gurion is given an opportunity to strike first. He's invited to a secret meeting with top French officials at a villa outside Paris. Here, he's presented with an audacious plan to invade Egypt. A French Air Force general outlines the scheme.
And he had invented the following scenario, that Israel should attack Egypt. Thereupon, Britain and France, who had forces in the neighborhood, should say, we cannot allow this kind of war because it will interfere with the Suez Canal passage, which is absolutely vital for the whole world's commerce, and therefore we are going to intervene and hold the two countries apart.
Ben-Gurion wants to invade Egypt, but has no interest in the Suez Canal. For the sake of his allies, however, he agrees to make it look like Israel intends to seize it.
There was no strategic reason from our point of view to at all do that. The only point was that he could say it's not far from the canal. It was about 40 kilometers from the canal, or 45 kilometers. But when you look at big maps, then you can say, the drop was not far from the canal. That was enough to fulfill the needs of the British, say the canal is threatened.
Eden likes the new plan. Israel's phony attack on the canal will give him the excuse he's been looking for.
He must have been immediately delighted to be apparently off the hook, that he didn't then have to take the decision to launch the military operation, because here was a scheme worked out with the French and Israelis, and if they all played their part in this play, he seemed to think it would be all right.
For the plan to succeed, the pact must be kept secret. Yet just as the meeting is finishing, there is a twist.
Before we broke up, to my complete surprise, a piece of paper was brought in for signature. There had been no mention whatever of a document emerging from these talks. The idea only occurred at that time.
Logan returns to London with the secret agreement and gives Eden a copy of the signed document.
We returned late that night and took the document to him in number 10. And his immediate reaction was, "Oh my God, I never expected anything to be signed."
Eden orders all the British copies destroyed and asks the French to do the same. They refuse. David Ben-Gurion has returned to Israel and put his copy away for safekeeping.
For us, collusion was a positive thing, not a negative one. For the British, it was negative. For Ben-Gurion, it was an assurance that he wasn't the naughty boy who just attacked out of the blue the Egyptian, but that he was part of a big scheme of two major powers. And for him, it was important.
On November 29th, Israel sticks to the script outlined in the secret plan and launches a lightning attack across the Sinai Desert. The UN now faces the biggest challenge of its history as it searches for ways to keep the crisis from blowing up into a third world war.
In the grey light of evening, British jet bombers have struck at Egypt as a prelude to the landing of British and French troops.
2 days after the Israeli attack, Britain and France trigger the next phase outlined in the secret pact.
What are we seeking to do? First and foremost, to stop the fighting. We've stepped in because the United Nations couldn't do so in time.
But Eisenhower is not buying Eden's excuse that his attack on Egypt is to protect the canal.
The United States was not consulted in any way about any phase of these actions, nor were we informed of them in advance.
The UN is dumbfounded. The United States introduces a resolution calling for a total ceasefire and condemns their old allies, Britain and France.
To the absolute amazement of the British, the French, the Americans took the lead in the Security Council in demanding that a ceasefire all round.
The President puts the resolution as a whole to the vote.
The British and French use their Security Council veto to block the resolution.
Will those who are in favor of its adoption please raise their hands?
In favor? China, Cuba, Iran, Peru, Soviet Union, United States, Yugoslavia.
Will those who are opposed raise
Against? The United Kingdom and France.
The U.S. is furious and takes their ceasefire resolution directly to the General Assembly.
Britain and France were arraigned before the General Assembly.
Lester Pearson has flown to New York to take direct control of the Canadian delegation. His diplomatic skills are highly respected. He helped draft the UN Charter and is a former president of the General Assembly. So the delegates listen carefully when he says the U.S. resolution is not nearly tough enough.
This resolution in its present form is inadequate to achieve the purposes we have in mind at this assembly. Uniting for peace. And peace, Mr. President, is far more than ceasing to fire.
He always looked to the UN from the very beginning as a way of preventing war. And how do you do that? You don't do it through diplomacy. You do it through the threat or use of force.
Word has spread that Lester Pearson has a plan to strengthen the American resolution with a bold new initiative.
People came streaming to our desk from all over the room practically. Not all at once, but in turns. And I think Pearson by that time had a reputation for being a good sort of middleman.
Our longer-range purpose is to find solutions for the problems which, because we have left them unsolved over the years, have finally exploded into this fighting and conflict.
Pearson's proposal is ambitious. Get armed troops on the ground quickly to stop the fighting, and then use the opportunity to begin a negotiated settlement of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Lester Pearson, or Mike Pearson as he was generally known, had proposed a United Nations peace force in 1955. It had been politely discussed, but nothing done about it. Therefore, it was not a new idea of his when he brought it up, but he brought it up at the absolutely critical moment.
Nothing like this has been tried before. 2 days later, Pearson presents his full resolution to the General Assembly.
Of an emergency international United Nations force to secure and supervise the cessation of hostilities in accordance with the terms of the above resolution.
We would do well to suspend our debate on this matter for the present and to adopt the resolution introduced by Canada establishing a United Nations command.
Pearson's resolution, delivered in the early hours of November 4th, receives overwhelming support.
United States, yes. Paraguay, yes. Venezuela, yes.
Within 48 hours, the Secretary General present a plan for the establishment of a United Nations force to secure and supervise the cessation of hostilities.
It's a new direction for the UN and a proud moment for Canada.
We make no apology and will never make one for the action which we and our French allies took together.
The UN resolution has shaken Eden, but he will not back down. On November 5th, Anglo-French paratroops invade the Suez Canal.
The paratroops thought that they could pull it off on the 5th. The British landed Port Said. Port Suez was captured by the French, but on the British side, there was some resistance.
His army has been devastated by the Israelis. Nasser continues arming the civilian population, including a young student named Talak Badrawi.
When we joined, the first thing they did was they gave us those cases of Kalashnikov rifles right out of the boxes with grease. And they said, okay, here is your rifle, you know. That's what you're going to defend yourself with.
With British and French troops fighting on Egyptian territory, the crisis could scarcely become more dangerous, but it does. On November 5th, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev steps in. Britain, France, and Israel are warned that Russia will not stand idly by and watch its ally, Egypt, destroyed.
He said to the world that don't be surprised if a consequence of your actions is that nuclear weapons will fall on London and Paris.
The world holds its breath. Could the Soviets be preparing for war with the West?
This was the first time they had ever made a nuclear threat. And he didn't make it because he assumed it would work. He made it because he felt he had no alternative. The world was waiting to hear what he was going to do for his ally.
That moment I did think this is really going to be the Third World War. There was suspicion, that nuclear weapons would be launched on London, and if Eden didn't back down, that was what was going to happen.
Eisenhower launches his U-2 spy planes to look for signs that Soviet troops are mobilizing. Nothing can be found.
Well, the dirty little secret in Moscow was that they didn't have any weapons that could reach London and Paris.
Eisenhower calls the Soviets bluff, warning them to keep out of an already dangerous situation.
They didn't rule out Soviet intervention, direct intervention at one point. They couldn't. But what I really think did is it intensified the urgency of their resolving this very quickly.
In Britain, anti-war demonstrations are now raging across the country.
And there is only one way in which they can even begin to restore that tarnished reputation. And that is to get out, get out, get out!
The 14-week canal crisis has caused crippling fuel shortages.
As fast as the stuff comes in, it's gone. At $6 a gallon, too.
The cost of mobilizing the armed forces has almost bankrupted the country. Britain is now begging America for loans to stay afloat. Eisenhower says no.
Eisenhower was quite firm. He said, as soon as you agree to get out, and really are getting out, we'll help you, but not a minute before.
By the time the main British assault force hits the beach, the fighting is over.
The war was in fact over by the time the bulk of British troops landed. And then we literally waded onto the beach and waited for orders. And that first night, we actually spent sleeping on the beach.
On the 8th of November, just 4 days after the Pearson resolution was passed, Canadian General Tommy Burns arrives in Egypt, the beginning of the world's first UN peacekeeping mission.
The arrival of United Nations contingents at Port Said causes a sensation that nearly develops into a riot by excitable Egyptians.
The UN has done the impossible. Thousands of peacekeepers from 8 countries, including Norway, Sweden, and Colombia, begin pouring into Egypt. Troops are mobilized so quickly, there is no time to prepare distinctive berets. Instead, U.S. Army gear is pulled out of storage and painted blue, the beginning of the famed Blue Helmets legacy. But from the beginning, the mission is compromised. Hammarskjöld has accepted Nasser's condition that the UN is here at Egypt's invitation and can be ordered out at any time.
I think Hammarskjöld felt he had to act quickly, get them in there. And he did accept the kind of conditions which Pearson didn't approve of, and he was very upset about it.
Nasser demands the right to choose which countries will send troops, preferring nations like Yugoslavia and India, who are more sympathetic to his cause. Canadian troops are preparing to leave for Egypt when they learn that Nasser has rejected them. He claims their uniforms make them look like British soldiers. Even the regiment's name suggests loyalty to Great Britain, the Queen's Own Rifles. It is an embarrassing moment for Lester Pearson.
He was absolutely horrified at the idea that after all his work to get this thing going and whatnot, the only regiment that was around that had its boots on and polished and his hair combed, ready to go was the Queen's Own.
Nasser backs down, a little, but only Canadian communications and air transport specialists will be part of the early peacekeeping contingent. Along the canal, UN troops are taking over positions held by the British and the French. The British even concoct an elaborate handover ceremony for the occasion. But the pomp and circumstance can't mask the bitterness felt by many on the parade square.
But I remember when we first saw these blue helmets, and we first saw these white vehicles, which were very ostentatious, you couldn't miss them. I have to say that most of the officers in the regiment took it as a mortal blow. It was the first genuine sign of the humiliation to come.
The humiliation is complete when in the dead of night, British troop ships quietly slip out of Port Said.
I think it was very, very hard on the professional soldiers who had gone into this enterprise in good faith, thought that this was going to be the final roar of the British Lion, and suddenly found that it was just a sort of mingy little squeak that had achieved nothing.
In England, demonstrators are demanding Eden's resignation.
Then, if he is sincere in what he is saying, then he is too stupid to be a Prime Minister.
Now in poor health, and with support within his own party disappearing, Eden makes his decision.
Can I just say, thank you very much for all your kindness to me, all of you, during my period of office.
On January 9th, less than 25 days after he accepted a ceasefire, Prime Minister Anthony Eden leaves politics forever. But he will never admit to the secret deal with Israel. And it is not until 1996 that the copy of the secret pact Ben-Gurion took home with him is made public.
He felt that he personally promised Eden not to expose him, so he never allowed to show this to anybody until after the death of Eden and after his death. To his last day, he didn't allow to show the protocol.
In Egypt, the UN mission is constantly being undermined. Even though peacekeepers are cheered around the world, their role is largely symbolic. Israel will not allow them into their territory, and Egypt keeps them bottled up. It's not what Pearson had hoped for.
His objective was to use this crisis as an opportunity to find a settlement. Well, it didn't happen. So he was disappointed, and he'd be disappointed still, I guess, right now.
Still, the world believes in Pearson's mission. He is a hero, the man who even for a moment brought peace to the Middle East. He is the only Canadian ever to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
I share this honor with many friends and colleagues who have worked with me for the promotion of peace and good understanding between peoples.
What the Suez Crisis seemed to do was to give hope to that pioneer generation at the UN, that maybe we were reaching a point where, as a collective body, the international community could play the role of honest broker and keep nation-states with their own petty squabbles apart and prevent war.
But winning the prize does not mean winning the peace. Pearson's dream of a lasting solution to the Middle East conflict never has a chance. When Nasser regains control of the canal, he destroys the statue of de Lesseps, a clear message of Egypt's contempt for Western imperialism. The legacy of the Suez Crisis will be war, not peace. Nasser will rally Arab nations into full-scale war with Israel. And the Suez Crisis marks a new era of Western intervention in the Middle East.
President Eisenhower meets the Washington press corps at a time of grave world crisis.
Within a month of Britain's withdrawal from Suez, Eisenhower does what he said he'd never do: commit U.S. troops to the Middle East.
Will not go to war.
In the following years, much of the Arab world accuses America of replacing Britain with its own brand of imperialism.
The very factors which led the Americans to keep their distance from Britain in moving too aggressively against Nasser in 1956, they lose sight of those, and 2 years later, they're doing exactly that.
For nearly half a century, U.S. troops are sent into the Middle East, beginning with Lebanon in 1958 and 1983, then attacking Iraq in 1991, and again in 2003.
We may find out that Iraq, in the longer term, is one of the most ill-advised operations. The jury's still going to be out on that one. The fact of the matter is that Iraq could turn out in the long run to be a Suez 50 years later. But whereas that will take years to find out with Iraq, with Suez, we found it out within a matter of weeks.
With nearly 50 years of peacekeeping missions to look back on, the UN today recognizes something that Pearson understood back in 1956. Peacekeeping is more than ending war. It's creating the conditions to ensure a lasting peace.
Historically, the fault with classic peacekeeping is it doesn't lead to a solution. So you've got to find a solution to the problem itself and make the two combatants live together. And that's our current view of peacekeeping now. But it's one that Pearson came to as a conclusion in the 1960s as he saw the Middle East conflict just drag on and ever more problems and no resolution to the problem of refugees and settlements and things of that kind.
Increasingly, the UN is replacing traditional ideas of peacekeeping with the tougher, more dangerous mission of peace enforcement. This new role of peacemaker reflects Lester Pearson's belief in the power of a world community to unite for peace. It's what he tried to achieve 50 years ago, during those climactic days of the Suez Crisis.